The reading is from Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 through 20. Now after the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. And for fear of him, the guards trembled and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has risen, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead, and behold, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. See, I have told you." So they departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." And while they were going, behold, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place. And when they had assembled with the elders and taken counsel, they gave a significant sum of money to the soldiers and said, Tell people his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So they took the money and did as they were directed, and this story has been spread among the Jews to this day. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." You may be seated.
Hey, real quick, two things as we dive in here. One, Joyce, what's the is this the sign for applause? Yeah. Hey, can we just show our appreciation to our brothers and sisters here from the deaf community that really teach us how to worship through sign language. It's such a joy to watch them from where I am, just to give physical expression to the joy of worship. So I'm very thankful that you are here and teach us how to worship. So thank you. And while you're doing that, turn to the camera and do that as well too. A couple weeks ago, we said goodbye to Zeno in Asia, but they still watch us every week, wishing that they could be here from Taiwan. So I know that that's about as good as close as they can get, watching us online. I don't even know what time of day it is over there, but whatever time they're watching, and they often will check in and say hi. And so there you go. Miss you guys. Okay, we got it. Yeah, oh man, always so much that I would love to just dump about resurrection. I'll start with this, and this should not come as a surprise to many of you, but maybe to others, it might be some of a disturbing surprise. I'm not on social media a whole lot. I do have an Instagram account, mainly because I like to follow my barbecue guys and my outdoor people, just, see them climbing and hiking around and good stuff. But somehow the algorithms apparently get the sense that I am also interested in whatever little church clips or Christian speakers or whatever. And every now and then, especially this time of year, I get shown this clip. Have you ever seen it? I actually forwarded it to some people, so you might have gotten it from me. It's some pastor in some small church. I don't know where it is, but he stages this episode during his Easter sermon where he has an Easter bunny come on stage. Have you seen this? Oh, it's great. Yeah, Alyssa, you seen this one? Yeah, and what does he do? He grabs his sidearm and he turns around and he shoots the bunny dead right on stage. Now, in my head and in my heart, I know that Jesus would not have conducted himself that way, and I ought not to do such things as well. But there is it is therapeutic for me. Whether it's a mild undealt with anger issues that are there and that's what comes out, or if you've been around, you know that I have a tendency to rant and rave about all things bunny and eggs and all that sort of stuff. I've kind of softened on that up over the years. In fact, this afternoon, after every Easter, we'll go up to the cemetery where my mother-in-law is buried, and we'll sing songs and have a little stick it to death party there. And then we'll also go to then some extended family that live in that area, and they'll probably have an egg hunt. And whereas before, I maybe would have sat in a corner with a scowl on my face, I'm okay with it, and I help Georgia and Jeffrey get their stuff. But the concern is, actually I was talking with Georgia yesterday, and she was saying, she's so excited about Easter, and she can't wait to go to Sadie's house. Sadie's a dog, by the way, and have this Easter egg hunt. And I said, yes, and that was about it. And then eventually she started, and I love getting up and doing the sunrise service. But that's always my interest and my hesitation, right? And it's that resurrection is so fundamental, so paradigm shifting that I want my kids to understand it has to have a meaning that can stand on its own. It has to have a meaning that is so loaded with joy and excitement and hope and promise that it doesn't need chocolate bunnies and little peeps and whatever else to prop it up to make it something joyful. Like that's my interest. Because when you read through the New Testament, man, everything hinges on resurrection, right? As Paul will say when he's writing to Corinth, man, if Jesus isn't raised from the dead, even though he died for your sins, forget about it. You're still dead in your sins, and we are all pitied, of all people to be pitied, if we're following this king whose corpse is rotting in a grave somewhere. It's all for nothing. And man, if you read through the New Testament, just take notice of how it's like these guys, their minds are blown and they're struggling to put together in some sort of theological sense. They're trying to make sense of this new world that exists now because Christ is raised from the dead. Right? When Christ comes walking out of that tomb, the world is fundamentally a different place. As we said at the beginning, like the old tyrants have been dethroned, right? Or the old stories of God's people through the ages, of the stories of desperation and longing and clinging with whatever they can to some small measure of hope that God would be faithful to his promise. Man, now that story has these wild new chapters of God's unrelenting faithfulness to his creation, first and foremost, to his covenant, and to his people down through the ages. And so my intent this morning is just to walk through Matthew's telling of this event. I want to walk through it, and I want to do two things. I want to just walk through it and help you understand that the only way you can receive this, because it's the only way Matthew knows how to give it to you, the only way you can receive Matthew's testimony is an eyewitness account to an historical event that has flipped his whole life on his head. And then like I said in the beginning, man, we spend every year, and essentially this is how I conceive of our sermons. We are unpacking life post-resurrection and how that works and what that means. So we do that every week, and if you're new to Grace, you're welcome to come back next week, and we'll keep the story going. But even today, I just want to highlight just a couple mammoth implications that you just get glimpses of here in this chapter, okay? So that's what we're doing. It's written by Matthew. Matthew's a follower of Jesus. He's been following Jesus for the past 3 years, started his life as a tax collector, one of the most vile and hated people all throughout Israel for a variety of reasons. Jesus meets him, says, "Follow me." Matthew leaves it all behind, becomes a follower of Jesus. We've been working our way through Matthew's account of the life of Jesus and his teachings. We've been spending time in the Sermon on the Mount, which is sort of like the epicenter of Jesus' teachings about life and the kingdom. So I figured we would stay in Matthew's account through Holy Week. And from the very beginning of the chapter, you can tell, Matthew's, it's almost striking to me. There's not a whole lot of commentary. It's just brute fact after brute fact after brute fact. He's not expounding on anything. He's not trying to prop it up and say, "Can you believe this?" He's just telling you His aim is to write as an historian, right? You see that. He gives you time, people, place, things, event, right? Like all in the very beginning. He says, now after the Sabbath, right? He tells you when all this stuff happened. Toward the dawn of the first day of the week, right? We're told that dawn hasn't come. This is why we get up. Oh, this year, 5:45, because it's so dang late in the season. And get there before dawn breaks over the hill, right? So we're told specific time. We're told specifically where. We're at a tomb, and not just any tomb. If you back it up into chapter 7, we're at the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph of Arimathea, he owned land. He had a tomb set up for perhaps him and his family. He gives that to Jesus to be buried, right? And we're told who? We're told Mary and the other Mary are at the tomb early in the morning. They're coming to anoint the body with spices. This is what you do. So, but they're there. And then we're told the events, right? They walk in, and there's no body, and instead there's this angel that says, he's not here, he's risen, just like he told you. Okay, and then, so here's the thing. You can go read, oh man, there's tons of religious myths out there, and you can read how, or there's even just regular myths and cultural myths and literary myths right out there. And you can go see how myths are written and developed and all that stuff. And, if it was Matthew's, maybe we'll say it this way. If in any way it was Matthew's intent to give to us a religious myth to keep the Jesus story and the Jesus movement alive a little bit, okay, at the very least what we would say is he's breaking not just one or two, but every rule in the book of how you construct a myth and make it even remotely believable. First of which telling you, he gives you specific details. I don't know if you've ever caught one of your kids in something of a half-truth or something that I don't think I'm getting the whole story here, and you start to interrogate them on that and ask them, they're probably going to give you at best vague details. As they're crafting this story, perhaps on the spot, they're giving you vague details. Sorry if I'm ratting out any kids here in your business of surviving life. But anyway, they're going to give you vague details. One, because they may not know the exact details that they're fabricating. Or two, they don't want to give you specific names that then you can call up and verify and say, hey, were you with my daughter last night doing this? Is what she told me. Right, so you keep it kind of vague. A lot of the old mythic stories, they are kind of vague. You don't get specific time, places, and people like this. Oh man, rule number 2, you don't have women being the ones who are given the first accounts of this. Well, at least not in the ancient world, you didn't do that. Women, it's a patriarchal society, so women's testimonies were not reliable. They weren't admitted into court unless you had a guy standing behind them going, that's good. Or, no. Right? That's the only way you could receive a woman's testimony. If you're trying to fabricate some believable story, you don't use women. And I suspect, though I don't know, I throw this out there so I can get my typical email from Mike Plord, who always, might find a little something to poke at me at. I would not be surprised, but don't quote me on it. I wouldn't be surprised if when Paul writes his letter to Corinth a little bit later than Matthew, and he's starting to wax about, resurrection, and he's telling some of the things that happened and who Jesus appeared to post-resurrection, it almost seems like he kind of cleans up the story. He doesn't mention the women in there because it's just a little bit safer that way. That's what you did. But even beyond that, the greatest maybe rule that he's breaking here is that he centers the whole thing on bodily resurrection. That's... You don't, at least in the ancient world, you don't craft a myth to prop up and to keep the Jesus movement going by saying bodily resurrection, right? In Greco-Roman society, if you know old Gnostic philosophy, right, they disdain the body. You ever wake up, those of you who have chronic pain, and you wake up and your body's just aching and sore and you can barely move and you feel like you're going to fall over and maybe you're like, curse this body. Like that's good Greco-Roman philosophy right there. Right? The much better story would have been to say that Jesus was died, he was buried, and his soul ascended to the realms of the gods, and he took this place in the pantheons of the gods, just like all those old Roman emperors, right? When they died, their souls became deified. That's the way you keep a movement a family line going. If you told someone in Greco-Roman society, Jesus has been raised from the dead, they would say, well, that was dumb. Why'd he do that? And if that's all you have to offer me of what's yet to come, no thanks. Jewish society maybe would have been a little bit different. They believed in an inherent goodness of the human body and of all creation. And so there was certainly a segment of Jewish culture that was looking forward to a day of resurrection. But it was a future day where all of God's people would be delivered from the curse of death, not just one individual, solitary individual in the middle of history. Again, all to say, this is not how you craft a religious myth. Right? And Matthew doubles down. Right? He doubles down on this and he gives us, through the story, we have two things. Actually, all the gospel writers will give you this. They will give you both an empty tomb and an encounter with the risen Christ. You have to have both, right? If you just have an encounter with this guy who was just crucified a couple days ago, but the stone is still in front of the tomb, you can smell a little bit of the decomposition of the body in there. Well, that's not resurrection. That's just either you had a bit of undercooked meat and you're seeing things, or maybe in that ancient world, sure, you'd have spirits that come and visit and all that sort of stuff. Or if you have an empty tomb, but you have no eyewitness physical encounter, well, then you get what the authorities tried to fabricate, that the disciples came in and somehow snuck past these Roman guards who have typically, if they fall asleep on the job, they're forfeiting their life at that point. But somehow they fall asleep, the disciples come in, they roll this stone away, and they take Jesus' body off to keep propagating this myth. These disciples who, by the way, are nowhere to be found at this point. All right, the disciples who couldn't stay awake when Jesus is an hour in torment in Gethsemane. Or the disciples who, when the guards and the authorities are showing up and they're taking Jesus away, they're fleeing. They're not there at the crucifixion. They're not there at the burial. And so, these guys are coming in, are waiting for the guards to sleep. They come in, they muscle that stone over and steal the body. Maybe that would be plausible if, right, Matthew, these guys who are putting that out there would have, as a result of the Jesus story keeping going and all these people coming now to this Jesus myth, would have seen Matthew as, a key leader in this and put him up on a pedestal and given him adoration. And right, but if you know the story of the gospel writers, followers of Jesus, that's not all what happened. Their lives were surrendered in death, often because, till their dying breath, they were proclaiming this news that Jesus is risen. Best we can tell, Matthew, based on both Christian and non-Christian sources, he died probably in Ethiopia. He took that good news of the gospel down into northern Africa and had a run-in with an authority there who commanded his guard to just stab him with a sword, and that's probably how Matthew dies. Okay, so again, it's just simply to say the only way you can read Matthew and receive this is either as eyewitness testimony. And 2,000 years of biblical skeptics and historians, that's essentially what they're going to say as well too, right? You can only read it as his attempt to give eyewitness historical account, but it's still too good to be true, or Matthew still is somewhere wrong along the way. If you receive it and believe it as a historical account, then let me just take what time I have left and give you just a few implications. Because I do think that, I wonder if the ascendancy of furry bunnies and eggs and all this sort of stuff isn't because we've struggled to believe the resurrection, but it's that we have watered down the implications of it. If all the resurrection is just this nifty magic trick that proves Jesus is who he says he was, okay, that's great, and it does do that, and that's great, but give me some eggs on the side, let's go hide some of these things and see if we can find them, and just spruce it up, make it a little bit more fun, right? But so much more than that. And you get little glimpses of it in here. Like when Jesus meets up with Mary and the other Mary, and they see him and they fall at his feet. They come and worship, and they tell him, or Jesus tells them, this is in verse 10, "Don't be afraid, but go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." And the striking thing about that sentence, this is the first time in Matthew's gospel, and it's the same thing in some of the other gospels, this is the first time Jesus calls them his brothers. Before that, they're disciples, they're followers, whatever, but this time, his brothers, part of the family, the kin. And again, this is so striking, because where are the disciples at this point? Nobody knows. They're off in hiding. I mean, take note of this. Like, just back it up into chapter 27 a little bit, and look at... let's take it back to verse 54. When the Roman centurion, and those who were with him keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake after Jesus dies and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." And then notice the commentary. There were also many women there, looking on from a distance, who had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him, among whom were Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. Keep going down to in verse 57, Jesus is buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, and you go down to 61. Who's there at the tomb sitting and watching? Mary and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite of the tomb. The next day, or let's jump it over again, like where we are in chapter 28. After the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week. Who's there? Mary and the other Mary went to see the tomb. In other words, who's not there? Right? The disciples, the guys. It's just so striking to me because you see in the disciples in these climactic hours, you see a laziness. They're just falling asleep when Jesus is sweating drops of blood and crying out to the Heavenly Father to take this cup from me. They can't bother to be awake with him there. Right? You see in them a lack of faith. Right? Jesus has told them, as before they're entering into the city, the Son of Man is going to suffer and crucified and be raised on the third day. Yet when the guards, the centurions, and the authorities come and take Jesus away, they scatter. When Jesus is in his moment of anguish, breathing his last breath, and as Mary and the other Mary are there weeping and watching, where are the disciples? Nobody knows. Some faithfulness. And this is the time that for the first time, Jesus says, "Go get my brothers." A couple years ago, I read the BFG to some of our older girls. Meg, Kate, you guys remember that? We read BFG. I don't even know the acronym stands for. Big Friendly Giant. I was thinking Big Freaking Giant, but that's not it. A Big Friendly Giant. Thank you. Big Friendly Giant, and among other things, what does the giant do? He's a collector of dreams, and he gets dreams, and he puts them in little bottles, and he writes comments on the dreams, and they have neat names. I wrote them down. Yeah, Happy Dreams. You remember what they're called? Anybody? Any Ronald Dahl fans in the house? Fizz Wizards. And then you know what the nightmares are called? Troggle Humpers. Right? So you got Fizz Wizards and I can't even pronounce it. Troggle Humpers. And one time, so he'll collect these dreams and put them in a jar, and then he'll write a note on the jar explaining what the dream is about. And he'll say, like, there was this one particularly vile, menacing dream, perhaps the worst nightmare of all. He grabs it, it's sinister, it's seething inside the jar, he puts the lid on, he writes on it, and this is this dream. He writes on it, "Look at what you has done." He speaks in funny language. "Look at what you has done, and there be no forgiveness." Right? It's the nightmare of this guilty conscience that has no pathway to absolution. I'm guessing everybody in this room has felt shame and guilt at one point, and that is a feeling you do not want to experience. But if you haven't felt that, you're either the strange, uniquely righteous individual, or you have profound coping mechanisms and distraction mechanisms, right? Because if you have felt shame and guilt and it has lingered at any point in time, you know that there's just about anything else that you would prefer to experience than the shame and the guilt that comes from wounding another. And can you imagine a world where you have wounded another, you feel the shame and the guilt of that, and there is no chance of absolution, no chance of forgiveness? Man, one of my deepest fears is that all of a sudden my family would stop being forgiving and merciful, right? Because I screw up, I fail, I wound in my pride and my selfishness, and I know I'm going to keep doing that. Thankfully, my family to this point is willing to forgive, but if the day comes when they won't, that's a nightmare scenario. So can you imagine what the disciples are feeling? Can you imagine what they would be feeling when they encounter Christ for the first time after they couldn't bother to stay awake with him in the garden? Or when they were so consumed with fear that they couldn't stand alongside him when he's being accused? Or they couldn't bother to be associated with him as he's being strung out on the cross, breathing his last? And then when he shows up to them, can you imagine the weight of guilt and shame that they feel? You imagine how crushing that would be? And for every right, man, Jesus would have to just walk away. Give me those women. They were with me. We're going to do this through the women. But he says, tell my brothers. For the first time, declare to them they are part of the family. We have equal status. Why? Because all their shame, all their guilt, all their screw-ups, all their failures was placed on Christ, buried into the grave. And what happened on the third day? The jail guard released the prison doors, and this one who was bearing the sins of his people, right, he comes walking out, a free man, essentially. You read the way Paul talks about the resurrection of Christ, and he'll talk about it as Jesus' own justification, in the sense that whatever sins were placed on, done, gone, in the tomb, he's walking out, they're left behind. Which means that as you are joined to him, man, you are walking out of that tomb free of those sins, free of that shame, free of that failure as well too, such that you can be named brother. You can be part of the family. Man, you can be here, right? From people from Grace Church, from not from Grace Church, from all over the place, right? You can be counted among the family of God in every tongue, tribe, and nation all over the world and all throughout the past 2,000 years. And if you're a brother, what else are you? I don't know what the official word is, but you have rights of inheritance now. Right? If you are Jesus' brother, then you are a participant in the inheritance that was granted to the true Son. In other words, what happens to Jesus, right? This inheritance of resurrection, enthronement, and new creation, like you are a full participant in that. You have every right to that inheritance now as Jesus does. Not because of who you are, but because of what Jesus has done. What happens to Jesus, resurrection, glory, new creation, that's now your story because Jesus can call you brother. Man, we could spend all day on that, but there's even more. Like, go back to those women standing at the foot of the cross. You know, and think about this. Like, Jesus is not the first. His death was not unique in a sense of, this crucifixion. Man, scores, hundreds, thousands of Jewish individuals before Jesus died the exact same way. Somehow they posed some little threat to the peace of Rome or some little threat to the Roman emperor, and so they were rounded up, taken outside town, strung up on cross, and crucified as just one more trophy to the supremacy of the Roman Empire and the oppression that they could wield at a moment's notice if there was the slightest hint of a threat to their kingdom. Right? So you imagine Mary and these other women that are there at the cross. Watch as he breathes his last. The body goes limp. They drag him off the cross. They take him into the tomb. They roll the stone over. And you can't help but imagine might and power, empire, it's won again. They have crushed our dreams yet again. Is there any chance for any sliver of hope that the powers and the principalities can't squash at a moment's notice? And when Jesus comes walking out of that tomb, what's the first thing that when he gets his brothers, what's the first thing that Matthew records him saying? All authority in heaven and earth now belongs to me. Another first. This is the first time he says this. He's been telling about the kingdom. He's been telling about his reign. He's been telling us it's near, it's at hand, it's coming upon you. But this is the first time on the heels of the resurrection that Jesus can now say, it all belongs to me. I have crushed every opposition. All power, all authority in heaven and on earth now belongs to me. Man, and this is climactic in so many ways. Like you go back to the beginning of the Jesus story when he is coming up out of the Jordan River, being baptized, and the dove descends. This is my son in whom I am well pleased. And then he goes into the Lenten wilderness to fast and to do battle with the enemy. And you remember, what's one of the temptations? The enemy takes him up to a high point. Look at all these kingdoms. Look at all their power and their might and their oppression and their injustice and their warfare and violence. And it all belongs to me, he says. And for better or for worse, right now we can theologically, but let's take him at his word at that for right now. It all belongs to me. And he says, I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you. Just bow the knee and it's all yours. You can do whatever you want with it. Jesus says, no, I worship God and I'm going to go his way, even if it means a cross. And he does. And so coming out, like you just wonder if as he's speaking to his disciples, he's also lifting his gaze to wherever that insidious enemy might be lurking. And he's saying to them, now all power and authority in heaven and earth belongs to me. You don't own it anymore. Herod doesn't own it anymore. The emperor in Rome doesn't own it anymore. It belongs to me. And man, that is so significant. Because it means now that even though the job isn't done, even though death and injustice and hatred and all this anti-kingdom stuff still does its work, yet now the arc of history doesn't bend towards the whims of the mighty and the powerful. It bends towards the intent and the purposes of the true king. Can I say, this is why it is so important that Jesus, he didn't just ascend to heaven as spirit and just get enthroned among the gods, but he came back bodily. Because it's not like, okay, yeah, this world has been overrun by rulers and powers and principalities and spiritual forces of darkness, and now injustice and warfare and hatred just is running the place. So forget this. Let me give you a consolation prize of some disembodied existence in the spiritual realm out there. No, that's not where this story is going. This story is a reclaiming project. Jesus' resurrection bodily in this world is the beginning of God taking back what belongs to him. Tim Keller, he wrote a book, Hope in Times of Fear, actually during the pandemic, and just after he had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, which would later kill him. And he says, no other faith says that we will be resurrected as individuals. No other faith says not only that we will be resurrected as individuals, but that the material world will be renewed as well. And so human society is destined not for ultimate oblivion, but for the longed-for goal of perfect prosperity, love, justice, and peace. And this hope is not wishful thinking, but is grounded in history, the sign of which is the risen Christ. This is the fullest possible hope. The resurrection of Christ promises not merely some future consolation for the life we lost, but the restoration of the life that we lost, and infinitely more. It promises the world and life that we have always longed for, but never had. The resurrection is the down deposit, or is like the initial installment of God reclaiming his creation. And that is powerful stuff, because I know there's a lot of people in the room who have suffered under injustice and corruption. You're bearing those scars now. You've been betrayed by people who are close to you. You have been bulldozed at work for whatever reason, right? You know the sting of that. And yeah, in the present day, while there's still tombstones out there, there is still corruption and injustice, but it's like But the resurrection gives like a whole new dimension to our experience of that. Like we journey through that, we feel the sting of that, with the pain of that, we cry with the saints, how long, O Lord? But yet there is this ray of hope that says this is not how this story ends, though. We got any Lord of the Rings fans here? Tolkien fans? Yeah. Not as many as we should. And that might be the assignment for the next year. Well, you're going to miss this illustration, but it's a really neat one. These two little hobbit folks, simple people, weak and all that, right? They're on this mission to destroy this ring of power in which all the evil and wickedness of the world has like been fused into this. They're on this mission to destroy it in the fires of Mordor, right? And as they're journeying closer to Mordor, and it's getting darker and darker, like the darkness and the sin of it, or like it's just the wickedness of it is weighing on them, and they're feeling crushed so much that they hardly can, it takes everything that they have to put one foot in front of the other to stay on this journey. And there's one night where Samwise Gamgee, he's the companion, as they're going to bed, he looks up. And let me say that, there, as he looks up in the sky, there peeping among the cloud rack, above a dark, high up in the mountains, Sam saw a bright star twinkle for a while. And the beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land. And hope returned to him. For like a shaft clear and cold, the thought pierced him that in the end, the shadow was only a small and passing thing, that there was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. And his song there in the tower had been defiance rather than hope. Because at that point, he was thinking just of himself. But now, for a moment, his own fate and even his master's ceased to trouble him. He crawled back into the brambles and laid himself by Frodo's side, and putting away all fear, he cast himself into a deep, untroubled sleep. The resurrection of Jesus doesn't mean that right now all the corruption and injustice and violence and warfare goes away. Would that it be so. But it does mean that there is this certain hope, this light that the shadows can't touch. They cloud over, but the hope pierces through, right? And so we journey through life feeling both, the shadow, the hardness of it, but then this ray of light and of promise and of certain hope that the shadow can't touch. And that's why we can sing. And perhaps most significantly there, right, or the most brutal tyrant, as we've talked about already, is the tyrant of death. Right? Not only do we feel the sting of injustice and corruption, but we feel that sting of death, all that is taken from us, all that it hangs over our existence. Man, when Jesus comes walking out of that tomb and saying, all power and authority in heaven and earth belongs to me, not even death controls this story anymore. That's why we go to a cemetery and we have a suck it death party. And that's probably not the most polite way of saying it, but if it wasn't a sermon, you'd probably get even more colorful language and maybe a few fingers popping up in the, at death, not at you all, at death, right? Because that's the picture. Death is this mortal enemy, and it's this mortal enemy that we don't have to turn the cheek to or anything like that. It's the mortal enemy that we ought to despise, and we look forward to the day when it's fully eradicated from God's creation. Until that day comes, we cling with desperate hope that Christ has crushed it. And we are brothers and sisters who share in that inheritance. Amen? Amen? One last thing before we close. The other implication, and you see it clear as day throughout the passage. Do you notice every conversation has two things? A proclamation and a commission. They meet the angels. Mary see the angel. The angel tells them he's not here. He's risen just like he says. Now go and tell. They meet Jesus on the road to finding the disciples. They fall at his feet and worship. And Jesus says, get up, go. He comes to the disciples. He gets them up on the hillside. He says, all power and authority in heaven and earth belong to me. Now go. Right? What does the resurrection, the other implication of that? The other implication of the resurrection is that you have freedom now to enter into a life of a depth of meaning and purpose such that you have never known before. Because for the resurrection of Christ, now you can spend your entire life telling, going, being like the disciples until whatever breath they have life, proclaiming that Christ is raised. There is hope. See it, believe it, grab it. You can spend your life doing the utterly insane stuff. If Christ isn't raised and you go around doing the Sermon on the Mount, turning the other cheek, forgiving the oppressor, taking the log out of your eye instead of judging those who come at you. If Christ isn't raised and you do that stuff, you're foolish. Far better would it be just to play the game of the empire. But if Christ is raised, if there's a new administration on the throne, and if death is defeated, and all you have to look forward to in the grandest sense is everything, as Tim Keller says, that you ever longed for and more. Man, can you see how free you are to live a reckless life that is so full of meaning and purpose because it's in participation with the King? If Christ isn't raised, find what's valuable to you and lock it up tight. The example of the early church, the example of the church around the world in persecuted places is Christ is raised, and so I can open those arms wide. I can let it go. I can feel the sting of loss. I can take whatever they take from me, and I can still go and live this wild life of deep meaning and purpose and value because it's all coming back to me tenfold. You want freedom from the massive weight of shame and guilt. You want freedom to live life knowing that the rulers and the powers and the empires of corruption will not win at the end. You want the freedom to be able to step out in fear and in risk, to live a depth of meaning and purpose that you've never known. Come to the empty tomb. Follow these women to the tomb. See the angel who says he's not here. He told you he's not here. See Jesus on the way and fall at his feet and worship. Come with the disciples to the top of the hill as Jesus stands up and says, guys, I'm telling you, all power and authority now belongs to me. Now go into every devil-infested land and get what's mine. And lo, I'm with you always to the end of the age. See Jesus say that. And man, if you've never done it before, put him to the test. He says he's with you. I mean, we can talk all day long about all the reasons you can believe the historical truthfulness of the resurrection. But you really want to know it's true? Take Jesus, take him up on his challenge. Live your life with abandon and come to Christ and say, prove yourself to me. You say you're with me. Let's see it. My bet is he will. Take him up on the challenge and do it. And come what may. Man, if you take nothing else from this, just know it's going to end well. I was walking into Amy's office for some reason. I think I was stealing one of your pens. I'll blame it on Jeffrey. But I was coming into your office and I was looking. I saw a little note on your computer. It's a quote from Pastor Tim. Pastor Tim, who, death got a hold of him and took him back in September, not quite a year ago. And as cancer was doing its worst in him, and even at the time when he didn't know it, but he was literally dying from the inside out at that point, he preached and gave a couple messages, and Amy wrote down one of the notes, and just so I get it right, the note says, because of these things, we can truly say, all is well. Right? Literally, as the cancer is eating him out from the inside, and he's, unbeknownst to him, even preparing to enter the tomb for a time, he can boldly say to this congregation, in spite of all these things, all is well. And whether Tim knows it or not, he was actually quoting from an old hymn written by another woman, Mary Bally Peters. And the last verse says, we expect a bright tomorrow. All will be well. Faith can sing through days of sorrow. All is well. On our Father's love relying, Jesus every need supplying. Yes, in living or in dying, all must be well. Amen? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.